If you've ever wondered why you can have a breakthrough painting one day and then feel like a rank beginner the next, this is really common. In fact, I think every oil painter, including your idols, has had this experience. So today I want to explore how 3 avoidable mistakes completely sabotaged this painting that you're going to see me paint. And I'm going to explain why these mistakes happened and how you can avoid not just these specific mistakes, but any of these seemingly minor mistakes that can cause a catastrophic effect when it comes to your paintings. See, I've spent years not only taking my art from amateur to award winning, but teaching hundreds of oil painters to do the same, which is where I've seen all these mistakes happen and why I'm so confident that I can break this down in a way such that you can apply it to any scenario. So you can get back in the studio and you'll actually make the art that you envision in your head. There are a lot of YouTube channels out there that will teach you techniques for beginners or how to paint like them, but none that really teach you how to go from beginner to artisan, finding your style so that you can stop just replicating and finally create. That's why I created this channel, and that's also why I've put together a free PDF guide that's a perfect next step so that you can put this into action in a way that is personalized just to you. Go ahead and download your copy. The link is in the description below, and let's dive in. With this painting, when it came down to it, all of the struggles that I had, it really boiled down to just a few one-time decisions that made everything else harder. In general, when I'm helping my students, I'm striving to help them to do the opposite. I love finding one-time decisions that I can help them make that make it way more likely that they are going to have a successful painting. That way, you aren't just grinding harder to get better, you're actually finding that you improve with absolute ease and enjoyment in the studio. After all, that's basically what your favorite professional artists do. They have thoughtful plans going into many of their paintings, or they have a studio with flattering lighting, or a setup that just gives them the exact sort of compositions they want time and time again. And they choose brushes and tools that make their signature brushwork naturally follow. So let's talk about the one-time decisions I made that set me up to struggle on this piece. And as I go along, I want you to think about how you could flip these around and turn them into one-time decisions that you can make to set yourself up for success. Don't worry, I'm gonna talk through this as well as I go through. But one thing I really want to emphasize today, and one thing I emphasize all the time when I'm teaching other painters, is I don't want you to feel dependent on me to make a great painting. I want you to feel empowered to do this for yourself. And ultimately, that means you have to learn to make the decisions the way your favorite painters make decisions. So don't worry. As you go through here, I'm gonna give you the answers to how you can set yourself up for success, how you can reverse engineer a successful outcome in your studio practice based on the mistakes that I made. But definitely think through exactly what you would have done differently here. What is a one-time change you can make that would help you to avoid not just these issues, but issues like them? The more you're thinking along these lines, the more successful and enjoyable your art making is going to be. Jumping right in, we need to start by talking about the environment in which I painted this particular piece. So this was painted from life at this year's Portrait Society of America conference, and there was a lot that was outside of my control. And the biggest thing that comes to mind here is the lighting. The light and thus the color in this room, I won't sugarcoat it, it was bad. It was really difficult to paint from. We were in a brownish beige room with warm incandescent lights that were really far up into the ceiling, so very far away from the model. And it led to a situation where there wasn't really a clear value structure on the model's face. And not only that, but there just wasn't a pleasant relationship of color around that model. And this is one of the biggest mistakes that I see painters make time and time again, where it's essentially a one-time decision that you make when you sit down to start working on a piece to work off of a reference that just isn't setting you up for success. And clearly, based on my experience here, this isn't something that is just about a photo reference. This can happen if you're painting from life. And it's not just necessarily about the lighting either. Fundamentally, if you are working from an image, whether it's a photograph or whether it's from life, where there is something in the image that is just not aesthetically pleasing or conducive to the kind of painting you want to make, you're going to be fighting the piece the whole time. I'll say that again because it's really important. If you are working from a reference that sets you up to make a different kind of painting than the kind of painting you would be proud to make, you're going to be frustrated by the result and you're going to be resisting the process the entire time. This is how you get into that situation where you say, well, I don't really like the color of dress the model is wearing. What if I just painted it another color? And then you paint it like 5 different colors, and before you know it, your painting has turned to mud. Please raise your hand if you've had that experience. I am raising my hand as I am talking. Funnily enough, this is also how you get yourself in that situation at the end of a painting where you say, I don't know if this is done, because you haven't actually planned out what the final painting should look like. So it's really difficult to tell if you've actually completed your work. Usually you get this feeling because there is something that's incomplete in the work, but it was something that really needed to have happened in the planning stages before you even sat down to start painting. So if I were doing this all over and I had full control of this situation, the environment on this painting day, I would have absolutely brought in a different light source and maybe tried to create a backdrop that would have been a little bit more aligned with the kind of painting that I would have loved to have made. Obviously, this is tricky when you're painting with a bunch of people like I was here, so I probably wouldn't have done this on this particular day. But any other time I'm working solo, I absolutely would have taken these steps. And the result would have been that I would have spent less time struggling to find the anatomy because there wasn't a clear light and shadow pattern to help me get there quicker. I would have spent less time fighting with the color harmony because it was just a really tricky one to work with. Now, I know better than to try and just improvise and really change the composition just through my imagination, but it would prevent or eliminate the temptation to do that. And overall, I think I just would have enjoyed the final product more because it would more aesthetically align with what excites me personally. So I said this before, but it really bears emphasizing. Most problems I've found that lead painters to struggle come down to a mismatch between what you'd be happy painting and what you're actually choosing to paint. This can come down to lighting, sure, but it can also be a function of subject, composition, reference quality, and the list goes on. I explore all of these in that free guide that I put together, so make sure you pause and download your copy now, just so you don't forget. So that first mistake really came down to an issue of convenience, and I think you're going to start to see a trend here, because my second mistake on this painting is that I was painting too small. This is a big one, especially for those who really specialize in painting portraits or painting people, but it does apply regardless of the subject. I have found through all of my years of painting that there really is a sweet spot when it comes to the size of the painting. Now, you'll know from my channel that I work relatively small quite a bit. I'm not one of those painters where you see me working on a 4x4 foot canvas very often. And the reason for that, well, there are a few. One, I'm making these pieces for YouTube, and really big pieces tend to just take longer. The second, though, is more strategic, and that is typically as human beings, we learn fastest when we have more iterative cycles we go through of practicing something. So if I, in 1 month, can really easily make 10 small paintings, each of them with their own starts, middles, and finishes, I will actually learn about the same as if I made those 10 paintings over the course of a year, but just happened to paint them bigger, even if I am painting more often for those bigger pieces. So essentially, we can shortcut our growth typically if we are working in this sweet spot where we're painting small enough such that we can finish the painting sooner. Now, this is really applicable when you're learning, when you're developing your style, when you're improving your skills. Once you are at the place where your skills are really set, you can absolutely apply what you've learned to any size of canvas. That being said, there is a point where it is just too small, and that is what happened on this particular piece. And just like the bad lighting, it was born out of convenience. I had run out of bigger panels, and so I grabbed this little 6x6 square. I used to work this size all the time, but it was at a point where I wasn't really painting portraits. And one thing I have learned is that if you are trying to get a portrait with any kind of detail in it, or someone's specific features that are unique to them, it is really difficult to do it anytime the size of that face is smaller than approximately the size of your fist. Now, the reason that I'm giving it to you in those terms versus the absolute canvas size is that naturally, it depends on how much of that canvas the face is filling up. So there's a difference between me just fitting a face in a 4x4 foot painting versus me, painting 50 people in a 4x4 foot painting. So I find it's more helpful just to think about that general guideline that if you're trying to go for a likeness, make the face at least the size of a fist. In this painting, I would say her face was probably closer to the size of my thumb, and that is the scale at which you just really can't get into detail at all. In fact, even some of the larger features on her face that I wouldn't necessarily characterize as detail start to just get unworkably small. I could have avoided a lot of reworking if I had simply taken the time to find or purchase a bigger panel. After all, I was at a portrait painting conference. I could have literally just turned around and gone to the Raymar vendor behind me and picked up a bigger panel, but I didn't. And ultimately, the reason why comes down to the next big mistake that I made, which is that I was rushing. You see, this wasn't a session that I had set up. It was an impromptu modeling session that some painters here at the conference put together. And I was trying to squeeze this in between various program sessions of the conference. And so as a result, I just made some really needless mistakes. I rushed my block in. I didn't take the time to actually put out fresh paint. And the whole time I was painting, I was thinking, go faster, go faster, go faster. Instead of, hey, is what I'm putting down correct? Or more to the point, is every brushstroke I'm putting down helping me? And is it helping me as strongly as it can possibly be helping me? You see, when I've watched my favorite painters work, even the ones like Richard Schmid, whose paintings you look at and you just think that they must have come so quickly and so effortlessly, especially when you consider how energetic and lively their brushwork is. But when you actually see them lay down that brushwork, they are working so thoughtfully. They're taking time to stand back and think and truly consider each mark. Their block-ins, the stage that I consider or would assume would be the most energetic, are usually where they are taking their time the most to make sure that they are essentially measuring twice, cutting once, whatever the painting equivalent of that is. By the way, Michelle Dunaway shared the painting version of this analogy at Portrait Society this year, and I am humbled that she actually watches these videos, which is mind-blowing to me. So Michelle, if you happen to watch this video and you can remind me what your piece of wisdom was about the painter's equivalent of measuring twice and cutting once, please let me know. You can put it down in the comments or DM me. I would love to hear it. So the result of me rushing in this case was that I just had some really needless drawing errors in this piece. And not only that, but I didn't really build up my paint layer in a way that would get me the end result that I wanted. And so if I had simply taken the time to ask myself, hey, how much time do I really have? And is that going to set me up for success? And then decided to either start painting or not paint accordingly, it would have made this so much easier. For what it's worth, I actually think that I could have made something really effective in this time period. But by really pausing for a second and considering it, I would have reminded myself to take my time in those critical stages of the block-in, where in this one, I really rushed it. And similarly, I'm going to talk about not putting out paint because this is such a big mistake that I see from painters in general. And in this case, I made an excuse for myself. I was like, hey, I'm already rushing. I don't have time to put out more paint. I will just make do with the colors that I do have on my palette. And you know what the result was? I wasted way more time trying to get the mixtures that I would have just gotten if I had taken 30 seconds to put out paint. I really just compounded every other problem. Not only that, but a lot of painters really love thick paint, rich texture, excellent impasto, but they paint with these teeny little fussy daubs of paint on their palette, and it's simply not enough paint to get the kind of marks they're making. And so if you're just so anxious to get into the painting process itself that you don't put out paint, well, not only could you slow yourself down like I did here, but there's a very real possibility that you are precluding yourself from actually getting the style of brushwork that you're interested in. So putting all of this together, I want to challenge you again to reflect on this question of what are some one-time decisions that you can make that really set yourself up for success. I know in my experience, some of the top ones that come to mind from my students are things like really carefully selecting a reference that already looks like the kind of painting you want to make, or making sure that the lighting in your studio sets you up so that you can really see accurate color on your painting without glare. Or really simple things like making it a regular ritual before you even consider to start painting to make sure your brushes are clean, you've put out fresh paint, and you're not going to be interrupted once you start that painting process. And as an extension of that, making sure that because you will have selected a really good reference that's conducive to the art that you want to make, that you're not going to have to improvise as you go along. Now, as a reminder, avoiding these mistakes doesn't necessarily come down to a list. This is more about a mindset shift, thinking really strategically about how to set yourself up for success. I really credit this shift with me being able to go professional in my work. That's why in the free guide that I put together for this video, I'm really focusing more on a professional thought process and strategy versus a bunch of kind of one-off tactics that I just sort of hope will fit your particular situation. So after you download your copy, let me know in the comments, what shifts are you going to make in your studio practice to help you avoid some of the same struggle that came up for me on this painting, or just struggles that you find coming up in your studio practice in general? Let me know down in the comments. I read each one, and you all are often full of really great tips and insights, so I can't wait to read what you share. I hope this helps you to really avoid these pitfalls in your own studio practice and that enables you to have fun in the studio. And until the next video, they come out every Saturday, have fun and happy painting.